first of all, just right off the top, I wonder what your thoughts were on what you mean when you say a frozen conflict.
Well, I don't think, Danny, that there's going to be a diplomatic solution. You're not going to reach some sort of meaningful peace agreement between Russia on one side and Ukraine and the West on the other. I think this war is going to be settled on the battlefield. And at some point, I believe it will stop. The Russians will be seen as the winner. It will be an ugly victory in the sense that I don't think the Russians are going to decisively defeat Ukraine. I think there will be a dysfunctional Ukrainian rump state left over. And of course, the Russians will end up taking at least those 4 oblasts that they've already annexed, plus Crimea. And in all likelihood, they'll end up taking even more territory. And the end result is you'll get a frozen conflict similar to what you have between the two Koreas. It'll be an armistice in effect. That's coming. And then the $64,000 question is what happens after that? The Russians have made it clear there's going to be no ceasefire. And what we need is an agreement. And that agreement has to accept the core Russian demands that were enunciated last June 14th of 2024. Putin laid them out to the Russian foreign ministry, and they've been repeated by Putin and his lieutenants on countless occasions. And we are not going to accept those terms. The Ukrainians are not going to accept those terms, and the West Europeans or the Europeans are not going to accept those terms. So there's going to be no ceasefire. And again, this is going to be settled on the battlefield. And by the way, just in terms of what President Trump is now doing, threatening secondary sanctions and so forth and so on, that's just making a bad situation worse. There's hardly any chance of diplomacy tamping down tensions between the West and Russia. We're just exacerbating the situation.
Yeah, and in fact, I want to actually ask you a little bit about that since we're touching on that topic right now. I mean, I think we can probably agree that it's certainly not going to have any impact on the course of the war, but on the economic battlefield, if you will, on a bigger level for our own selves. I mean, we're already in really tense and difficult negotiations with China to trying to get some kind of a trade deal. We're also working, and in fact, things are not looking good with Brazil. Already, they're angry about the existing situation, and now on top of those difficult times and whatever we have been doing on both for months now, you want to slap a new 100% on there? I mean, how is that even functionally going to work?
Well, I don't think he's going to do it. I think it's all talk, and he'll walk it back. Actually, I think the country that's most important in this regard is India. Relations between the United States and India were supposed to be terrific under Donald Trump because Trump and Modi, the Indian leader, have historically been good. But it's been all downhill since Trump moved into the White House. And he's now threatening to put secondary sanctions on India. They've not worked out a trade deal with India. And the Indians are actually furious with Trump. And we need India on our side of the ledger because for purposes of containing China and dealing with China, we need friendly relations with India. Remember, India is part of the Quad. It's just hard to believe what's going on here. He's poisoning relations with India. He can't do much with the Chinese because the Chinese have too much leverage over us. They control those rare earths and rare earth magnets, and they're just limits to what Trump can do in terms of getting tough with the Chinese.
Well, let's look at even with India. What's even in the realm of theoretical possibility? He says he doesn't want them to take any Russian oil. Well, if India suddenly were to say, all right, fine, if we have to choose, I guess we'll choose America over Russia, and suddenly they don't buy that oil, what would that do to their economy, and how would they replace that oil? Where else would they get it?
It would wreck their economy. Who knows? I mean, I'm a structural realist, and I believe structure really matters. And I believe if you're Japan and you're South Korea, the mere fact that you live right next door to China makes China a threat that can never approximate the American threat, because the Pacific Ocean is a huge body of water and we're far away. All of that's to say that from a structural point of view, there are very powerful incentives for the Japanese and the South Koreans to ally with the United States no matter what. But I'm sophisticated enough, at least I hope, to understand that structure has its limits. And one could argue that if the United States continues to misbehave, if President Trump continues to slap our allies around, and here we're talking about the South Koreans and the Japanese, who are two of our most important allies, that at some point they will be forced to work out some sort of accommodation with China. You know what I'm saying here, Danny. So I think we have to be very careful. I find it hard to believe that Trump doesn't understand that for purposes of containing China, it's essential to have good relations with South Korea and Japan. And slapping them around the way he does makes absolutely no strategic sense. But he just doesn't seem to care. And by the way, just to take this a step further, the United States is pinned down in the Middle East, and the United States is pinned down in Ukraine. And that has made it very difficult for the United States to fully pivot to East Asia to contain China. You would think, given that situation, the United States would have a deep-seated interest in, if anything, being on better relations than ever with both the South Koreans and the Japanese. But what we see is the exact opposite, as you just described.
Yeah. Well, I don't understand it either. It's my puzzler is not working very well. Okay, I want to shift on over to our primary target here today, and that's with this issue of the frozen conflict. Since I first heard that statement that you made there, and of course you've said it on our show several times, I started really thinking more about it and kind of looking through the landscape here through a different lens through that, because I've always been so focused on what's happening on the ground today and how will the conflict come to an end. And I've spent very little time looking at what happens on the other side of it, however it turns out. And the more I did, the more I guess a little bit concerned here, because I see what could appear to be, from a number of different sources, people seem to mentally be preparing for that day already. And let's start off with this was on Fox News, I think yesterday or day before, from former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, who's certainly well tied in with a lot of Republicans. And so not so much what he says here personally, but that he's saying things that a lot of others believe, and that a lot of the things that he says are held as facts by people. And I'm guessing you're going to have a little bit of a difference of opinion on what constitutes a fact.
For some reason, Putin believed that Trump was like Biden or like Obama, that he could push him around, he could lie to him. Much of it's been blatant, where Putin will talk nice in the morning, and that evening they'll bomb, an orphanage or a hospital or a senior citizen home, and somehow we're supposed to be too stupid to realize that we're basically having a Russian dictator who has contempt for us. Well, that's a huge mistake if you do that to Donald Trump, because he's not Obama, he's not Bill Clinton, he's not Joe Biden. And I think what you'll see in the very near future is very dramatic increase in sanctions. And I suspect you're going to see a very significant increase in both the flow of weapons and in targeting accuracy to allow those weapons to be used inside Russia.
So several things I want to pull out here, and let's start with the first one. Putin always lies. I hear that all the time. You can't take anything he says at face value. He lies all the time. And as an example, he tries to reiterate something that Trump has been saying, that in his phone calls with Putin, Putin tells him in the morning with happy voices, everything's going to be great. And then all of a sudden he's bombing, buildings and whatever later on and killing a lot of civilians. But I've seen no evidence that Putin lied about anything, that he just told him, we're not going to have a ceasefire. We are going to keep fighting, but we'd love to talk. How do you see that part about the Putin lies part?
Just building on what you said, Danny, I think you can disagree with Putin's position, but he has been remarkably consistent in his pronouncements and his behavior. He has made it unequivocally clear from the get-go that there will be no ceasefire until there is a peace agreement. And he stipulated what that peace agreement has to look like. And he's made it clear that he's unwilling to bend on what he thinks the main terms of that peace agreement should be. There's no evidence whatsoever that he was telling Trump something different than that. All of the evidence is that he has been telling the same story over and over. So this idea that, Putin is deceptive, he's been leading Trump down the primrose path, making it look like they were going to have an agreement and then welching on the deal at the last moment. This is nonsense. This is the kind of rhetoric we get from Trump, because Trump just tells stories. Facts don't matter to Trump, right? He just, tells stories off the top of his head. And it's to his advantage, he thinks, to portray Putin as the good guy and himself as Putin is the bad guy and himself is the good guy. And that's why we end up in the situation that we're in. And we end up having to listen to Newt Gingrich